Dear YouTube, as you know, under copyright law I am allowed to use portions of copyrighted material, in this case copyrighted material belonging to the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society of Pennsylvania, so long as this is used for the purpose of criticism and parody. Please remember this when Watchtower comes complaining, because I've embarrassed them by using their propaganda in a way they disapprove of. Thank you. Hello viewers. Well, I must have mentioned in either my last video or the video before that I'm struggling now to keep up with the amount of material the governing body is coming out with. But nevertheless, I feel it's important to try and keep up with these JW Broadcasting episodes, because apart from the fact that they're showing us the governing body as they really are, I feel as though there's a lot of propaganda in there that needs to be untangled. Yes, the majority of what we're looking at is ridiculous and nonsensical and just blatantly outrageous, but interwoven in these videos, in these hour-long videos, are what I consider some extremely potent, heart-tugging material that really needs exposing for what it is. So that's why I feel as though I need to carry on, if possible, you know, giving one rebuttal to each of these videos for as long as I've got the energy, at least, just to show people how this propaganda works. So without further ado, here is the February 2015 episode of JW Broadcasting with Samuel Hurd and his sidekick.
Unity. It is often so elusive in political, religious, social, racial, and financial circles. We love the amazing unity that we experience as a global brotherhood. No matter the country, one's background, or former beliefs, it is amazing that around the world we have unity of thought. Though speaking hundreds of languages, there is one singular sound or unified message that is being preached.
So, not for the first time in this video, Samuel Hurd refers to the unity of thought among Jehovah's Witnesses as being amazing. And, you know, for those like me who are now outside of the organisation looking back in, I can tell you it isn't amazing at all. It's typical of cults. There's nothing extraordinary about having the ability as a cult leader to get everybody within your cult to think exactly the way you do. That's not amazing. Yes, I'm sure that there are lots of racial barriers that have been broken down, and cultural barriers and those sorts of things, which I'll come to in a moment. But actually getting, you know, a group of people within a cult to all think the same thing, there is nothing amazing about that.
That is amazing. Millions believing exactly the same based on the word about Christ. One singular sound goes out. That is unity of belief.
Either Sam Hurd is very easily impressed, or he knows full well that he's speaking nonsense, but either way, as I've just said, there is nothing extraordinary or amazing about getting a group of people within a cult to all believe the same thing.
Some may say, unity of belief, you're brainwashed.
Yeah.
Well, we do agree that our thinking has been washed clean from the complicated doctrines that have evolved since Jesus walked the earth. However, the unity of mind results from a thorough study of the Scriptures. It is a matter of learning God's Word and separating its teachings out from the many doctrines that have been introduced by human thinking.
So now we have Sam Hurd telling us that the reason why Jehovah's Witnesses aren't brainwashed is because they've actually had their minds washed clean from what he refers to as complicated doctrines. Now, if you actually know what Jehovah's Witness doctrines are, I can think of a fair few of them that can not be described as uncomplicated. Just one example, the overlapping generations doctrine. How can you possibly introduce that to somebody you've not met before and then walk away thinking, well, that was, you know, fairly simple? You know, a generation that witnesses something but they're not the generation. It's actually the generation that they were in touch with, that overlapping generation. That's the generation, but they're all one generation. There is nothing simple or uncomplicated about that. In fact, it's a perfect example of one of the many doctrines that Jehovah's Witnesses teach that is precisely complicated, and the reason why it's convoluted and complicated is because it's man-made, which is precisely what Sam Hurd is talking about. So the more he tries to deny that witnesses are brainwashed, the more he is forced to describe precisely the situation that we have among Jehovah's Witnesses. And this thing he says as well about this being a matter of learning from God's word. It's not man-made doctrines, it's learning from God's word. Well, I've already said in one of my videos, if it's just about learning from God's word, then you should be able to stand up in a kingdom hall and say, I believe in Jehovah, I believe in Jesus, I believe in the Bible, I believe in paradise earth, I believe in Noah. I just don't believe the governing body are God's spokespersons on earth. And just try doing that and see what happens. If this was all really about it being purely about the Bible and purely about obeying God's word, then you should be allowed to believe in the Bible and believe in God and believe in Jesus and not necessarily have to pin everything on 7 blokes in New York.
When a classroom full of students take a math course like algebra, at the end of the class, no one accuses them of being brainwashed when they all end up united in their understanding. They simply learn the math accurately and put it to use.
Now, I like to think of everybody who watches my channel as being reasonably intelligent, so I don't think I really need to explain why that is an utterly ridiculous analogy. But in case I do, and just to drive this point home, I think I'm going to rebut it by talking about something that happened at my pioneer school. Our pioneer school instructor, who was a circuit overseer, in one of the lessons, I remember it very vividly, although for some reason I didn't write it down in my notes, but it's stuck in my mind. The circuit overseer took a marker on the whiteboard and wrote a very, very simple equation, such as 1 plus 2 equals 3. And he asked us to discuss it, and the consensus was, well, this is something that can't be argued with. 1 plus 2 does in fact equal 3. And he said something along the lines of, the thing with the truth is, it's not as simple as that. You can't just show somebody the truth and it's as simple as 1 plus 2 equals 3. It requires faith. And that is what Sam Hurd completely forgets in this ridiculous analogy. That when a class go through algebra and understand the laws of maths, what they're doing is training themselves in how to understand the universe with very, very clear logical principles. This is maths, this is science, these are things that are quantifiable and that you can't argue with. 1 plus 2 does equal 3, it will always equal 3. But Jehovah's Witnesses, what they teach is rely solely on faith. I issued a challenge a few weeks ago now, probably a few months ago, called the Cedars Challenge, in which I asked anybody who watches my videos if they want to take down my YouTube channel or my JW Survey website. All they need to do is answer the Cedars Challenge, and the Cedars Challenge purely asks for proof that Jesus came to the earth in 1914, and by the time he'd left in 1919 he had selected Joseph Rutherford and his associates to form what would be his faithful and discreet slave, his governing body, and that for some bizarre reason this mantle of authority was passed down through some means of apostolic succession, which is denounced in both the Insight volumes and the Reasoning book. I explain all that and show evidence of how that really, really happened, and I will shut down everything, shut down my YouTube channel and my website. So unsurprisingly, nobody's come back and answered that, which just demonstrates that it is purely a matter of faith. You just have to have faith that the overlapping generation teaching is true, that the directors of the Watchtower Society in 1932 were the faithful and discreet slave, were the governing body of that time, that there is a link between the apostles that Jesus selected, and Joseph Rutherford, Fred Franz, Lyman Swingle, whoever. This is all faith. It all requires faith, and that is essentially what faith is. As I've said in previous videos, it is the ability to believe something without necessarily needing evidence. So you simply cannot, and it is an insult to people's intelligence, to equate faith in what Jehovah's Witnesses teach with algebra.
Going back to a math class, at the end of the course, all are united in thought. They learned algebra, but that does not mean they all like each other. They may have petty rivalry or outright prejudice against some of their classmates. When we learn the truth from God's Word, we become united, not only in thinking, but also in spirit with our brothers around the world. Even if we had deep-seated prejudice in our hearts before studying with Jehovah's Witnesses, it begins to melt away when learning the truth.
He seems really proud of this really terrible analogy, and he's continuing it. But as though I really need to, here's another example of how it's outrageous. All you need to do is change the proposition from learning algebra to some other context. So let's imagine that there's an art class, and they're all painting a bowl of fruit which has some green apples and a yellow banana. When at the end of the class, the art teacher goes around and looks at everyone's paintings, and on every single person's paintings, sure enough, the banana is green. The banana is yellow and the apples are green. That is no great statement about unity. It's just the students painting what they see. They're painting what's in front of them. If they were going to be abstract, they could paint the fruit whatever colour they like. But let's assume they all wanted to, paint what they saw in the colours that they saw it. Algebra is simply observing the way things are and learning how to quantify the way things are, and formulate the way things are. It's nothing. There's no opinion or belief about it. It's just fact. So to keep banging on this drum about algebra being the same as believing in what Jehovah's Witnesses teach is just outrageous. And then he brings in this idea about compulsory friendship, which I'm going to talk about.
One Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all, and through all, and in all. My, that is unity, isn't it? All of those fine qualities reflect the personality of Jesus. Perfect. He was unspoiled by the ingrained hatred and prejudices that we may have been exposed to. So, is it easy to curb ingrained prejudices? No, it is not that easy. It would be good if it was, but it isn't.
This is fascinating because now Sam Hurd is talking about prejudices. I can't help but wonder whether, because he's the token black guy on the governing body, it's almost compulsory that he has to give a talk that in some way focuses on race. That's the theory. I have no idea. Maybe it's just a coincidence. But he's talking about ingrained prejudices, which I'm given to assume, or I must assume, are just any kind of unfair prejudices. Well, if that's the case, Sam Hurd, how is it that I am not allowed to speak to my father and my sister because they are prejudiced against me as someone who no longer believes what they believe? How can you talk about hatred and prejudices when you are teaching hatred and prejudice of people who disagree with what you teach, specifically people who were once duped into believing what you teach and decide, well, actually, it's no longer for me, thank you very much. And yet we're stigmatized as mentally diseased. How is that not hatred? How is that not prejudice? What about if, a gay or a lesbian walks into a Kingdom Hall? Now, regardless of what your religious views are, you have to admit that Jehovah's Witnesses are prejudiced against gay people. They may be able to excuse it, you the viewer may be able to excuse it to yourself, but whichever way you look at it, it's a prejudice. So I don't quite buy this idea that Jehovah's Witnesses as a religion or as a people are completely free from any kind of hatred or prejudice. I don't buy it one bit. Why? Because I'm actually on the receiving end of quite a lot of hatred and prejudice from my family who are Jehovah's Witnesses.
Learning what is right and then consistently doing what is right is a process. We learn the truth gradually. We soon have unity of mind and thinking. However, in time, we purify ourselves. How? The verse said, by our obedience to the truth. And did you notice Peter says with unhypocritical brotherly affection? Not the way he acted 10 years or so earlier. He even said to love one another intensely from the heart, deep inside. We would have love for all in our brotherhood without even a twinge of prejudice.
I challenge anybody to watch that particular segment and not find that it absolutely reeks of cult mind control. So just to recap, Sam Hurd starts talking about unity of mind and thinking. Well, how do you define that in any other way than mind control? Everyone thinking exactly the same thing that just happens to have been dictated to them by a small elite group of leaders. He talks about obedience to the truth. This is one thing the governing body demands from Jehovah's Witnesses, that they listen, obey, and be blessed. Obey their preachments, their commands. And probably one of the most disturbing things about this video, and I touched on it before, is the concept of compulsory friendship. I found this disturbing when I was a witness, and it's one of the things now I've left the witness faith that I'm most relieved to be rid of, because I could never quite grasp as a Jehovah's Witness this whole idea of agape love and the fact that I had to absolutely love everybody who was a Jehovah's Witness, even if I couldn't stand them. Even if it was the last person that I would consider being friends with if we didn't just so happen to both be Jehovah's Witnesses. I had to love this person, and Sam Hurd even speaks in this video about loving your fellow witnesses intensely. So it's not just liking them and getting on with them, it's loving intensely anybody who just so happens to be a Jehovah's Witness. Well, guess what? Guess who's just been baptized as a Jehovah's Witness? Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper, who mutilated 13 women many years ago and is now a full-fledged card-carrying Jehovah's Witness. So my family, my dad and my sister, who I mentioned just now, they must love the Yorkshire Ripper, the killer of 13 women. They must love him intensely and look forward to spending eternity with him in paradise. But me, their own flesh and blood, who simply disagrees with their religion, I'm to be hated. I'm to be looked down on as someone who is mentally diseased. How is this moral? And yet the way Sam Hurd talks about it, you would think, well, this all sounds perfectly reasonable. Jehovah's Witnesses love each other. They don't have any prejudice. Nonsense. They're full of prejudice. And the whole concept, which I understand is in a way, it's more of a Christian issue than a Jehovah's Witness issue, but this whole idea that you have to love somebody just because they have your religion, it's one of the things I'm really glad to be rid of, because I'll choose who my own friends are. Thank you very much. I'll surround myself with people who I get on with, not necessarily people who I agree with. I don't agree with all of my friends on everything, but if I get on with someone and I like them, I'll have them in my life. I won't have anybody point to someone and say, you must love that person intensely because they have the same religion as you do.
How good and how pleasant it is for brothers to dwell together in unity. But the spirit of unity in our organization is manifested in many ways. Robert, I know you have a good example of unity among God's people.
Yes, Brother Hurd.
I've played this clip just now because it just, for me, highlights perfectly how awkward the whole JW broadcasting experiment is. Here you have people who are used to standing on a platform and maybe delivering from notes, maybe speaking at least slightly extemporaneously. When you see the morning worship comments, you see governing body members and governing body helpers who are a little bit more at ease. They have a little bit more freedom to just, you know, speak from their heart, you know, speak extemporaneously. But in this very manicured and superficial studio that they've created, everything has to be absolutely spot on, and you can see that Sam Hurd, it just doesn't work for him. You know, if this was an audition for a newsreader, you know, yes, next please. You know, it's only because he's a governing body member with the Rolex, which I couldn't help but how can you miss that Rolex? Wow. Rolex and pinky ring. So again, how can a witness who thinks of these men as being humble and modest look at all of that jewellery and see a humble, modest man? But going back to what I was saying, it's interesting that Sam Hurd needed a sidekick, just like David Splane needed Mark Numair. Sam Hurd needs Robert Lucioni, and Robert Lucioni is, I would probably say, worse in many ways than Sam Hurd, because, you know, he's so robotic. You know, all of the parts that he has. At least Mark Numair, when you're watching him, he's juggling his Bible, so you're transfixed. Is he going to drop his Bible? You know, look at those smooth Bible moves. But Mark Numair is just doing these ridiculous, over-accentuated hand gestures, and refusing to, how would I put it, the way he's speaking, he's not, instead of speaking freely and naturally, he's enunciating every single word and every single syllable, and it just sounds very, very superficial and forced and fake. And it just amazes me that the people behind this whole JW broadcasting project, you know, can't look at it and think, you know, is this really the face of the organisation that we want to put out there? Will witnesses really respond, you know, to such unprofessional presenting?
To our knowledge, the first Navajo baptized was in the 1950s. It was a sister. It wasn't until the 90s where more effort was put forth to bring in more of the witnesses into the reservation. In 2011, the governing body gave directions to establish a remote translation office in Chinle, Arizona. In March 2013, the first Navajo congregation was established, and from that point on, we now have 3 additional congregations that have been formed, and we have 7 groups. The last few years, we've assigned a number of special pioneers, there are 12 of them now, and 2 missionaries to the reservation to spread the good news to the Navajo people.
This is actually a very interesting segment of the JW Broadcasting episode, and I want to talk about it because it's very, very clever propaganda. And I want to explain to you, maybe I don't need to explain it, but I'm going to explain to you my thoughts on this, and you know, you either agree or disagree. But here's how I see things. We're now seeing the organisation zoom in on a group of people who live in America, the majority, if not all of whom already speak English, but they also happen to speak Navajo, which is great. We have a similar situation in the United Kingdom, where pretty much everyone speaks English, but if you go to Wales, even though there are millions of people living in Wales, there's actually a percentage. I've just checked the latest figures. It's 582,000 Welsh people speak Welsh. Now, the overwhelming majority of these people also speak English, but it's similar numbers with this video on the Navajo people. With the Navajo people, it says there are 300,000 of them, and in Wales we have 582,000 who speak Welsh. Now, as far as the Watchtower is concerned with the Welsh language, since I've actually checked on this, and at least as far back as 1990, Watchtower has been publishing Bible study aids for Welsh speakers. Now, you don't hear a great deal being made of this in this video, because now it's their turn to focus on the Navajo people. And, you know, don't get me wrong, I think it's great that they have material in their own language. I can understand if they're raised speaking a language and, you know, they use it on a day-to-day basis with their family. I can understand how that is a more appealing language in which to take in information. Never mind the fact that this is cult information. I can understand, you know, I don't begrudge them having a language, is what I'm saying. But I do think it's very, very interesting that Watchtower should zoom in on a population who already had access to Watchtower publications, albeit in a different language, but nevertheless a language that they could understand, and therefore had an opportunity of escaping Armageddon with their lives intact, without being slaughtered like the billions of people, as I've discussed in one of my very latest videos. Unlike the billions of people who are going to be slaughtered when Armageddon comes, without, you know, most of whom will have never heard of Jehovah's Witnesses. At least the Navajo people, even before any special interest was taken in them, had a fighting chance of knowing what the good news is, if we accept that premise that the good news is somehow a ticket to evading global annihilation. Now, with all that in mind, let's think about three countries: North Korea, Somalia, and Afghanistan. Now, please watch my 30 other lands video. I'm going to put a link here, and in that video there's a clip played by a Bethel representative who not so long ago said that there are no Jehovah's Witnesses in those three countries. So not just that those countries are under ban, that, you know, that the work goes on there regardless. No, there are no Jehovah's Witnesses in those countries. It's just too dangerous, and you can understand why when you look on the news. Afghanistan, large parts of Afghanistan are under the control of the Taliban. Somalia is basically a pirate country, and North Korea is under the control of a maniac who kills anybody who doesn't worship him. So it's understandable that there will be no witnesses in those countries. But those countries, I've just literally checked the figures. There are 24,895,000 people in North Korea, 10,428,043 people in Somalia, and 31,822,848 people in Afghanistan. You can see where I'm going with this. That's 44.7 million people who don't have any Jehovah's Witnesses preaching to them. They just don't. So if Armageddon came tomorrow, which is, let's face it, most Jehovah's Witnesses would welcome Armageddon coming tomorrow. They're taught that Armageddon is going to come imminently. 44.7 million people would die without even knowing what a Jehovah's Witness is. Now just think about that. Have that in mind as we continue with this piece of propaganda about the Navajo people.
They've struggled for many years on the reservation and just off the reservation because they had to attend English meetings, and they did wonderful. Jehovah blessed their beautiful efforts, and at this assembly it was apparent it touched their hearts.
For the first time ever in my life, I didn't have to translate from English, and to be able to hear it, and it goes straight here. It doesn't stop here, it goes here.
I think the most exciting to me was looking at Psalm 68:4. Bohod nihi, e Jehovah walia. Think about that name. It's amazing that you know who the creator is.
The joy that I feel because Jehovah is like talking to me in Navajo, and it hits here.
I really hope that you've just watched those clips now, thinking about what I just said about the people in Afghanistan and Somalia and North Korea, and thinking, you know, wow, what a sickening piece of propaganda. And I don't blame the people who were interviewed, who were crying about the fact that, you know, for the first time I could understand, and for the first time I didn't need to translate. I don't blame them. I blame the people who are exploiting their delusion and their getting, you know, overly worked up about this. The simple fact is that before this assembly, they still had an opportunity to learn the good news and escape annihilation. The same courtesy is not going to be outstretched to the people in the Arab world, in parts of the Middle East where the preaching work is either under ban or completely, or there are no witnesses at all. I really hope I've made that point clearly enough, because it makes the whole video just make no sense whatsoever, and makes you realise just how distorted Watchtower's view of the world is. But I'll carry on playing a few clips, and please, if you can, look out for what the Bible looks like. They're all holding Bibles, and just look out for that Bible.
I always imagined the new system, and today I saw it, and so it's really special, very special.
I see this as a small step in Jehovah's organization. Soon, we're going to all learn one language, and that language is love.
I feel like Jehovah reached out and hugged the Navajo people. That's what it was like. Like he embraced them and said, "I love you."
We pray Jehovah's continued blessing upon all the effort that's being put into preaching the good news to people in all nations, tribes, and tongues, including the Navajo field.
But it isn't all nations, tribes and tongues. There are lots of entire nations and tribes and tongues that don't know what Jehovah's Witnesses are, and as I've said, will be massacred when Armageddon comes imminently, just for living in the wrong part of the world. So this video for me highlights not just how low Watchtower will go with their propaganda and with exploiting people's emotions to get their message across, but also how the people who are behind the propaganda perhaps aren't putting two and two together, or if they are, that makes it even more sinister. But they're not able to, they've partitioned in their brain the fact that all of these other people exist in the other part of the world and they're going to die. And that somehow doesn't matter, but these 300,000 people who speak a certain language, they do matter a lot to Jehovah. But moving that point to one side, I asked you to look out for the Bible that's used, because the impression that's given, you know, maybe I'm being overly cynical here, but the impression that's given in this video is that Watchtower has provided all of these materials in the Navajo tongue for the people. This you know, remarkable provision has been made for what is really a minority, and Watchtower is bending over backwards to satisfy the spiritual need of this small minority of Navajo speakers. Well, that Bible isn't a Watchtower Bible. You can actually buy it online. I'm going to put a link in the description and show the website page very quickly now. That's where you can get this Bible from. It's not a Watchtower publication. I think it's the American Bible Society or something like that. But you know, Watchtower isn't open about that in the video, and anybody watching the video would assume, oh well, that's the Bible that Watchtower's given them. No, it isn't. That's Christendom's Navajo Bible. All Watchtower has really done, if you actually stand back and view this whole situation objectively, what Watchtower has done is figure out that they need to speak Navajo with people who they want to indoctrinate, who are Navajo speakers, produce a few Bible study aids in the Navajo language, set up congregations, and arrange an assembly. That's essentially what's happened. But you know, watching this video, you would be forgiven for thinking that there's been some amazing miracle, and Watchtower's really bent over backwards, you know, with these people.
And we have 4 different casts that we're using, each somewhere in the range of 80-90 per cast. 3 different locations we're going to be performing at, and this spans over 4 days.
The evening programs include providing some food to the friends that are here, some spiritual entertainment with music, some interviews, some videos.
We haven't had field service part of our conventions as in the past. However, it's so apparent Jehovah's behind this. The example set by the slave, it's so evident this should be done.
They're facing similar challenges in the ministry, but they're still working hard while dealing with these challenges. Hearing that was very encouraging, and it gave me the renewed motivation to keep preaching with zeal.
So I wanted to show this clip for 2 reasons. It shows the rather strange international conventions phenomena, and I've done articles on this already. It's very strange how Watchtower bends over backwards to entertain delegates to international conventions. And the only reason I can think that they would do this is because delegates who attend international conventions have to pay a lot of money when they're booking. They have to book their hotels through Watchtower, so Watchtower gets to make a profit on the hotel bookings. And I can only imagine that for that reason, these people who spend a lot of money on attending a Watchtower event are treated like celebrities. And we even have things like, you know, worldly music being played at Kingdom Halls, line dancing on the platform, which was just unheard of when I was a witness. So I actually find the whole international convention thing very, very peculiar, and that's really on show in this segment of the JW broadcasting video. But I think it's also worthwhile pointing out that cameo from Tony Morris. I think it's very deliberately been put in there to give the impression that the governing body are mucking in with the publishers. They're doing the preaching work too. What that's got to do with an international convention, by the way, I've got absolutely no idea, but it's almost like we need to show the governing body on the ministry, and also Brother Morris is taking a bit of a battering at the moment. We need a little bit of a charm offensive. Let's cram a picture of Tony Morris. Let's cram a movie of Tony Morris and his wife on the ministry into this segment about international conventions and somehow make it appropriate or make it fit with what we're talking about. But I just found it very, very deliberate, wanting to portray the governing body as normal people, as just like you and I, and not popes, basically.
One of the things I had to do was ask permission at my job, ask for a week off in order to be here. I prayed a lot to Jehovah, and through him, they gave me permission, and I was able to be here.
I'm so energized and pumped, and I really just see us walking into the new world and feeling all of this every day.
So again, we have very dramatic, over-exaggerated, you know, hysterical people. The whole idea being, if people watch people being this excited, they'll get excited themselves. You know, the excitement is and emotion is infectious. Very, very potent propaganda. Well done, Watchtower, for hitting a nerve there. But no, I really find it distasteful that friends and relatives of mine who are Jehovah's Witnesses will be being exposed to this kind of propaganda, which is so clearly intended to pull on people's heartstrings over what is essentially nonsense. But what I wanted to talk about there was the fact that there was a sister shown talking about her praying to Jehovah and getting time off work. And the insinuation is there that Jehovah was prayed to, listened to the sister's prayer, and thought, yeah, I'm gonna give her the time off work. Never mind the fact that there are, you know, children dying of malaria and, you know, people dying of hunger and disease and of natural disasters, you know, children getting cancer and that kind of thing. No, no, no. What we really need to do, what I need to do as the Almighty, is intervene with this sister's work arrangements and make sure she gets a week to attend a convention. Absolutely. Well, it's grotesquely immoral, but unfortunately, when you say something as a matter of faith, you're able to say these sorts of things, and it all makes sense, or it's supposed to make sense. But you know, how grotesque that this sister should be deluded enough to think that, you know, the Almighty, you know, drops everything to give her the time off work when there is so much suffering, not just in the world in general, but even among, you know, Jehovah's Witnesses. So very, very distasteful.
About a year and a half ago, the branch called and invited me to help out with the international conventions.
February of 2013, we were invited to work in rooming, and it was confidential. We couldn't even tell our wives what we were doing.
Darling, what are you doing? I just walked in on you and noticed that you clicked off your web browser. What were you doing?
Dearest, it's nothing for you to worry about. It's something that's top secret that Watchtower is asking me to work on.
Oh yeah, right, George. What were you really doing on the internet? Do you think I'm stupid?
No, really. It was a top secret assignment from Watchtower. I'm not allowed to talk to you about it, dear. It's to do with rooming, though.
The letter we sent out that described the activities let them clearly know that all they'd be doing is coming here, greeting the friends, and leaving. They'd be here maybe an hour. And that didn't deter a single person.
I enjoy volunteering because it allows me an opportunity to show my appreciation to the organization, to Jehovah. It gives me opportunities to demonstrate my love for the Brotherhood.
I do this professionally for my business, and so I just decided to make it a priority, and this Jehovah was my top client.
Two things worth noticing there. The first thing is that Jehovah and the organisation are interchangeable. Notice there. The sister who was had guys on either shoulder was saying, "Oh, it gives me the opportunity to show my appreciation to the organisation." That was first. To Jehovah. So it was the two words Jehovah and the organisation, as I've mentioned in a previous video. Jehovah and Watchtower are now interchangeable. You know, you can use either, and most sentences in Watchtower literature still work. And you also had the quite clever, quite brainy looking entrepreneurial sister saying, "Oh, well, Jehovah's my top client." Well, it's not really Jehovah, it's Watchtower, isn't it? So again, Watchtower and the organisation are interchangeable. If Watchtower tells you to do something, it's Jehovah telling you to do something. And I also found it interesting how in the video, in the little clip just before those two sisters were talking, you had a little clip of a brother taking a tour in what looked like some kind of museum with a picture of Joseph Rutherford on the wall. So there was obviously some kind of event that the delegates were taken to where it was about Joseph Rutherford and his associates being imprisoned in Atlanta Penitentiary. But of course, you know, it's just this whole sickening idea of Rutherford being idolised and his picture being shown in the year 2015 when so much, well, it would have been 2014, but when so much of his writings were just absolute nonsense. And we know from history that he was, at the very least, a racist bigot and a bully. We know this from stuff he's written and from the Olin Moyle lawsuit. And there's a very, very strong argument to suggest that he at least was a heavy drinker, but more realistically that he was an alcoholic. And yet here is this man being venerated by Jehovah's Witnesses in the year 2014 as though he's some kind of saint.
The friends responded admirably. It was amazing. The first day we had 500. We hit that quota. So it was great to see the entire parking lot full with smiling faces and signs and people screaming and yelling for the delegates. It was a wonderful sight.
It's completely Jehovah's hand. It's pretty cool.
I am serving as one of the 800 volunteers. I'm serving as a waitress.
I came here today to welcome my brothers and sisters from Russia, from just all different parts of the world.
I don't know them, but I know I love them. They're my brothers. And I tell you what, when I went to their countries as a kid, they showed me the same love. And so I'm happy to give it back to them.
I don't know them, but I know I love them. They're my brothers. Again, what a disturbing display of this whole idea of compulsory love that I was talking about. One of those, you know, one of those people that she was greeting at the International Convention could have been Peter Sutcliffe or somebody like him, who has done terrible, abominable things to people, but just because he's decided to be a Jehovah's Witness, he is worthy of love. But I am not worthy of love by this charming looking sister, purely because I don't share the same religious beliefs as her. This is why compulsory love, in my view, is, well, it's immoral. It's if you accept the premise of compulsory love in the way Jehovah's Witnesses do, it makes it possible to love somebody who is entirely unworthy of love, somebody, a monster like Peter Sutcliffe, and it means that you immediately take out of the equation, you know, good, kind, moral people, simply because they don't agree the same as you do. And we can't have, apparently we can't have a JW Broadcasting video without it all being blamed on Jehovah's hand. And if you watch my Tony Morris prank call video, you'll see just how seriously the governing body really takes the Jehovah's hand nonsense.
Have you ever asked yourself, what is really the difference between an international convention and a special convention?
No.
What can we do to make our home a safe and peaceful haven? Let's look at some steps that can help us in the right direction.
Anger. Hurtful words. Devastating flatulence. Sometimes, when you're making a cult video, you need an extremely soothing voice, preferably an English accent with a slight northern lilt, spoken by someone who sounds like he has 5 minutes to live. To be perfectly honest, this is not my real voice. I mean, could you imagine if I went about in my everyday life talking like this? Hello, shopkeeper. My name's Howard. Could I have a pint of milk, half a dozen eggs, and some Coca-Cola, please? I'd probably get arrested. No, I'm putting on this voice to make myself sound wise and reassuring. Hey, a gig's a gig, don't judge. Anyway, back to the video. Do I have empathy for my partner? Understand that sometimes she just wants to chop my bits off, especially when I tried doing a 5-hour family worship marathon, or play Kingdom Melodies on the car stereo when we're going to the shops. Just because I suggested organizing a ministry day for our anniversary, there's no need to tear up our wedding photos. What were the things that made us happy? Can we revive this love again? Maybe try something different in the bedroom? After we've done a quick check on Watchtower Library, of course.
So that was just me having a little bit of fun there, but this is what I meant at the beginning, how there's some really, really potent propaganda, but all you need to do is just tweak 1 or 2 things and you notice how it's basically constructed. You know, take some dramatic music, take some dramatic filming, add somebody who's talking like this, and suddenly it all becomes very very emotional, and hopefully there are Jehovah's Witnesses watching it who won't need me to just look straight through it and see it as the garish propaganda that it is. But now I want to show you some clips from another propaganda video where we're shown this young man, and there's a lot about this video that doesn't make sense, but I'm going to first show you the first clip.
I was raised on the Talowa Indian Reservation, and I was baptized when I was 12 years old. Although I was baptized at a young age, those that were around me doing the exact opposite of what I was taught, of what I heard, what I saw, didn't match up. Their actions, well, it destroyed my world, it destroyed everything, it destroyed my family. And in time I grew very prejudiced against all organized religion, Jehovah's Witnesses included.
There is just so much of this story that doesn't add up, and I actually find it very frustrating to watch from like a journalistic point of view, because if you're going to tell a story, then tell a story. Don't leave loads of loose ends for some kind of mystery that people have to figure out. If you're going to allude to something, then explain what it is you're alluding to. And what this video does is it alludes to lots of things without explaining anything, which only leads you to assume that Watchtower is basically snipping, editing the bits that they want to, that contribute towards the propaganda, and leaving out the bits that would actually make them look bad. But here's what we do know. We have this chap called Forrest James, who has a website, forrestjames.com, and if you go on the About section, I've actually printed it off, but there's it's the same guy basically. It has the same story but from a different angle, because obviously on his website he's trying to appeal to his clients. But it's interesting because on this video, as you'll see, he talks about the film and entertainment industry in a fairly, unappreciative way, which is not the same tone as he has on his website. But anyway, what do we know about Forrest James? Well, according to the intro that Robert Lucioni gave, this is somebody who regained his relationship with Jehovah after being inactive for 16 years. So straight away, when Robert Lucioni is giving the introduction, you're imagining somebody who, who developed in the organisation, was established as a witness, and then became inactive for a 16-year period and eventually came back. But what we actually have with Forrest James is somebody who was baptised at the age of 12. So he was a kid. I was 11 when I was baptised. Forrest was a year older than I was when he got baptised. But, I look back to when I was 11 and 12 and I was a kid. I was in no position whatsoever to form a real opinion on what my religious beliefs were. I was just acting on the religious beliefs that were imposed upon me by my themselves indoctrinated parents. So you can't really point to Forrest James and say, here is somebody who knew what he was doing, who decided to have a relationship with Jehovah. He didn't know anything about being a Jehovah's Witness at the age of 12. He only knew what his parents or whoever it was that convinced him. He only knew what he'd been told, and it was the same situation for me when I was 11. So I find the whole premise of this experience extremely dodgy. And furthermore, I also find it very, very strange that Forrest refers to people when he was first baptised who we can only assume were witnesses, because he says it didn't square up. Their actions didn't square up with what they were supposed to be doing. Well, that's the impression I got. Their actions destroyed everything. Their actions destroyed my family. And you don't introduce that little nugget of information without expanding on it a little bit and giving us an idea of what you're talking about. All we're left is supposition and trying to guess what he's talking about. But this is clearly something that upset him. I can only assume that these were people who were inside the organisation who did something horrendous that still emotionally scars this chap Forrest James and had a big impact on his family. So it must have been something truly dreadful. But Watchtower just skirts over that whole subject, which only leads you to conclude, well, if they'd have told the full story and said exactly what happened to Forrest when he was in his early teens, maybe it wouldn't make the organisation look so good. And there you have it, propaganda. Propaganda is putting a spin on something so that something that is actually detrimental is actually good, because you're leaving out the unsavoury bits.
I was adopted by the film and entertainment industry as a teenager. I would say to myself with each movie or billboard that if I could just get this next one, I would be satisfied.
I found this whole phrase, this is before I did my research, I found this whole phrase, I was adopted by the film and entertainment industry, very, very strange, because what exactly does that mean, being adopted? Does that purely mean you had a career in the film and entertainment industry? That's what it sounds like to me, and I'm sure there are lots of people who would like to have a career in the film and entertainment industry. I think what he means is that he had a career in the film and entertainment industry at a very young age, and that's what it looks like as well when you read his story, because it looks like he basically was a model as a teenager, and he was on billboards, which is why he talks about billboards. It says, one of my first billboards was photographed by world-renowned photographer Richard Avedon for a Levi's campaign in Times Square, New York. So he was in Times Square. Following were a half dozen more billboards across New York, Europe and Asia. And this is where it gets interesting. He says, it was my great fortune to be mentored by industry leader Norman Seeff, whose accomplishments include numerous awards for photography and world-renowned published work. Norman gave me access to my first studio, set of lights and professional equipment to work with. I learned a great deal from Norman and his way of shaping light. Today my style is heavily influenced by him and my approach to lighting. And then he starts talking about my work. My work brought me back to the reservation I grew up on for a year and a half, where I documented my tribe and culture, my business, and he goes on to talk about his business. But when you read his bio on his website, this does not sound like someone who is bitter or resentful of the career he had as a model or in the photography industry. It sounds like he's actually very appreciative of it and living off it now. So I'm not trying to accuse Forrest of being deceptive here. I think his story is being exploited by Watchtower. They probably found out about him and thought, oh well, here's an example of a young trendy guy who walks away from the organisation and then comes back. But when you actually do some digging, he didn't suffer that much when he was gone. He probably suffered more as a Jehovah's Witness by the sounds of things. And he's still living off what he learned when he was away in the world. But so that whole side of things confuses me, and I think personally perfectly showcases how this is propaganda, because it's, as I say, exploring the side of the story that makes you look good and ignoring the side that doesn't. But there's also this whole issue of the medicine man.
Later on at a prayer ceremony with a medicine man, he said Jehovah. And I approached him about it afterwards, quite indignantly, and said, yeah, but you don't believe in the Bible, do you? It's got nothing to offer. And he said, well, how do you know? Have you read it?
So a medicine man, says Jehovah and advises reading the Bible, and this is a basis for coming back into the arms of Jehovah's Witnesses. But notice how Robert Lucioni characterizes this whole story.
Brother James is now in his third year of pioneering and was recently appointed as a ministerial servant in his congregation. Isn't it true that there are no circumstances too complicated for Jehovah to help us? Why, in Brother James' case, it was a non-witness medicine man that reminded him of Jehovah's existence.
Okay, two things. One, I don't understand how Forrest James's predicament was complicated in any way. He was baptized as a child before he knew what he was getting into. Something happened when he was a witness that drove him away from the religion, and 16 years later he was hooked back in by some obscure conversation with a medicine man. I don't see anything complicated about that. I see quite a lot of mystery and intrigue and things that possibly, you know, would be negative about the, you know, his experience, his initial experience as a witness, but I don't see anything complicated there. And the second thing, it took a medicine man to remind him of Jehovah's existence. So Robert Lucioni, a helper to the governing body, is telling us that a medicine man reminded somebody of Jehovah's existence. Now, hopefully I don't need to explain that once you start going down that particular road, you have lots of questions to answer. Is Robert Lucioni saying that the medicine man was a believer in Jehovah? Is he endorsing the medicine man as a believer of Jehovah? Is he saying that the medicine man knew all about Jehovah's Witnesses, knew all about Jehovah's Witness doctrine, and was just holding off becoming one himself for whatever reason? It's just absolutely outrageous to suggest that somewhere there's a medicine man who believes fully in Jehovah's Witnesses and in the existence of Jehovah and in the authority of the governing body, but you know, he would rather just tell young people who he meets randomly to look into the Bible and to become Jehovah's Witnesses. He doesn't quite want to become one himself.
You will enjoy this archive interview with Brother Lyman Swingle, who was part of that very first video team. Brother Swingle was later appointed as a member of the governing body until he finished his earthly course in 2001.
The headquarters of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, a center of New World action.
We were given the instructions, well, why not make a film of world headquarters and what we do here?
I just want to take this opportunity to say that if you're a Jehovah's Witness watching this video and you haven't yet watched the New World Society in action, the first, as Robert Lucioni says, the first video that the Watchtower Society ever produced, you should definitely watch it. And you should watch it, while you're watching it, you should count in your mind the number of times that the word or the phrase or the term governing body is used. I'm quite happy for you to do that, and I would be intrigued to see what your conclusions are, because it's actually, I think, over an hour long, the film, and it takes you on a tour of Bethel. I think it was filmed in 1953. Takes you to the President's office. It's called the President's office, and that alone should tell you everything you need to know about the way Watchtower was structured in the 1950s. There was no governing body. It was a president. A president ran everything, and he had a Watchtower board of directors, but the board of directors were just there to basically do what he told them to do. That was the way it was structured back then. The governing body arrangement didn't really start until 1971. It started to be referenced in the literature in lowercase governing body slightly more in the 1950s, 1960s, but it wasn't formalised. The arrangement wasn't formalised until 1971, and it's very interesting. I've done an article called "The Governing Body of Jehovah's Witnesses Explained," and I actually have in my article the New World Society in action, and that's one of the things I say. Watch this archive footage of World Headquarters and see how many times the words governing body are used. They weren't in existence in 1953.
It was a compliment to Jehovah's people putting out something like that back in those days. But it illustrates that you don't have to go off to college and get a high education to do something. If Jehovah's Spirit is upon it and blesses the project, many people have benefited from it.
I find it very sad that that Lyman Swingle, who actually strikes me as being probably one of the nicer of the previous governing body members, I find it very sad that after his death, he's being invoked to put people off higher education. And you can kind of understand to some point what he's saying. What he's saying is, well, you know, when you have an organisation that wants to do something, they don't necessarily need to lean on people with university qualifications if they want to do something badly enough. That's really what he's saying. But I can see perfectly why Watchtower has chosen this particular interview to show, because they're wanting to really pummel home the anti-education message that was from the previous Toni Morris video. They're wanting to pummel that home, and perhaps nothing demonstrates that more clearly than the other propaganda piece that we're treated to next.
I often reminisce about the old days. So many happy memories in Jehovah's service.
Yes, so many happy memories in Jehovah's service, standing on a sidewalk with your husband and handing out leaflets, and well, that's pretty much it. That's how she spent her life, handing out cult propaganda. No, I find this whole video sickening, and I think it's ironic that the sandwich board that the young lady is wearing in that little reenactment says "Choose Life," because how sad it is that so many people of that generation wasted their lives, wasted their entire lives, right through into old age, serving and promoting Watchtower when they could have been actually making some kind of contribution to the world around them. You know, educating themselves, filling their minds with knowledge and using that knowledge to benefit the human race. Rather, they spend their lives you know, handing out leaflets, handing out tracts that are basically full of dribble. And what's really sickening about this video is, as though that isn't enough, as though it's not enough that they've wasted their lives, you know, promoting Watchtower. What Watchtower now wants them to do in their old age is coerce other young people into wasting their lives too.
I can still do so much to encourage others. The young ones especially need our help. I decided to reach out and encourage them.
College scholarship, pioneer application form. College scholarship, pioneer application form. Which one do I go for? Seriously, this really irritates me, that Watchtower's doing this. Trying to even suggest that it's a choice. It's not a choice, it's a no-brainer. If you're invited if you're given a scholarship, go for it, just do it, don't even think about it. Fill your mind with knowledge and use that knowledge to make yourself and everyone and the world around you better. It's just a no-brainer. Do not pioneer. I've done pioneering. When I first started, I was doing 90 hours a month. Within a few months they changed it down to 70, so I did 70 hours a month. But what a total waste of time that was, doing nothing other than making things easier for some group of men in New York I'd never met and who don't know me. Well, one of them knows me now. But no, really hideous video. So this fictitious old lady is supposed to be an example to older ones watching this JW Broadcasting episode, and what Watchtower wants old people to do is, having wasted their lives as Jehovah's Witnesses, it wants to recruit old people, it wants them to recruit young people to make the same mistakes they've made, to waste their lives in the same way, which is really double the insult.
I have have been able to encourage others to enjoy and start their life of full-time service.
So yeah, I think that was one of the most disturbing features of the latest February 2015 JW Broadcasting video was, I just find it very, very sad. And I've already done a video on the whole generational aspect of my activism work. I really do see this as a generational struggle in my own family in particular. I see the previous generation who are resigned to the fact that they've wasted their lives, but still selfishly insist that the next generation repeat their mistakes. I just find it grotesquely selfish. And there you can see in this video a very clear example of Watchtower basically demanding that people who from previous generations who have been failed by Watchtower, who have been promised things that have never come true, should be, that Watchtower should recruit these people to go and encourage other young people to, new generations of young people who have their lives ahead of them, to waste them away in this grotesque full-time service. And it really is service, it's service of the governing body. Really, really disturbing. But hey, that's what I'm doing activism work for, to try and highlight this. And I really hope, well, I don't just hope, I know that there are witnesses who will see straight through this, whether I talk about it or not. And I recently found some of the documents from when I was first starting to realise I had doubts from a few years ago. And one of the things I wrote down was how outrageous the whole thing on higher education was. So I know that there will be lots of Jehovah's Witnesses who will feel the same way and who will see straight through this video, and I'm glad about that. But this is basically my video for this episode. You'll see I had a bit of fun before, as I mentioned on the dramatic family advice video. But loads of people, when this video came out, immediately started saying, when are you going to do a parody of the cult of the cart song? So I just kind of, and only today did I get around to recording my own parody of the literature cart song, and it was actually much harder than I thought it would be. And I take my hat off to whichever brother it was that actually sung the original version, because wow, you've got a big range, and if I'm honest, I struggled. It was not my proudest moment singing. It wasn't the kind of song I would have picked, basically. But I kind of muddled through it. I kind of cheated in parts and muddled through it. So I hope there will be some entertainment value in this. If you want to have a go at singing it yourself and producing your own video of the cart song, perhaps using mine as a basis, or perhaps recording your own lyrics, I'll try and make some files available that will make it easy for you to do that. But yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this particular JW Broadcasting rebuttal, and I'm going to sing you out now with the cult cart song. And as always, thank you for watching.
Have you had the opportunity to enjoy public witnessing in your territory using a literature display cart? We have heard many good experiences from this form of the ministry. But in this next segment, a music video, find out what a day in service is like from the perspective of the cart. This is a big tune which gives that little cart a big heart. This is entitled, If You Could See What I See.
I'm a cold cart, made up of bits and pieces, a frame, a handle, and some wheels. I'm a cold cart that spreads indoctrination. What is that like? Let me tell you how it feels. If you could see what I see, if you could visit
all the places that I go. If you could see the people there who will all burn at Armageddon, don't you know? If you could hear what I hear, the sound of folks who need new personalities, that's when you'll see how more easily you can count time standing idly on the street. I've got fear and I've got threats, I've got control and I've got rules. I take this kingdom message everywhere. When the crowds pass me by, I'm designed to catch their eye. Wherever there's no Google, count on me, 'cause I'll be there. If you could do what I do, you'd know the propaganda in my mags and books.
What a feeling to be deceiving. I'm so glad to be a JW cult guard.
Talk about a unique perspective.